Hi, Nick Vince here. This week on the Chattering Hour, I'm joined by Tom Holland, an actor turned writer and director, and responsible for some of the most well-known and influential horror films. Titles such as Psycho 2, Fright Night, Child's Play, The Beast Within, and Stephen King's Thinner. Up next on the Chattering Hour, Tom Holland. And we're back with Tom Holland. Holland created Vampires Resurrected Norman Bates, created Child Killer Dolls, and even tackled Gypsy Curses with Stephen King. And he's also currently writing a novel, a sequel to Fright Night. What I'm going to do is, if I may, is I'm going to take you right back to a childhood in Poughkeepsie. See, I always do this with American names. Poughkeepsie.
It's an Indian name.
Right.
Yeah.
And were you born there?
I was born in Vassar Hospital in Poughkeepsie, yes. And I grew up in Highland, New York, which is across the Hudson River, on what they call the Bear Mountain or West Point side. And at the time it was a tiny town, surrounded by apple orchards and dairy farms, and one church at the end, Protestant church, and a Civil War monument on the way out of town. And now it's exploded because it's in the Hudson Valley, which is really beautiful. I mean, it's mid-state New York. It's lovely. And they put the freeway out from New York City right into New Paltz, which is where my mother's family is from. They were Dutch. And all the New Yorkers, especially now fleeing New York City and fleeing COVID, it's become like the poor man's Hamptons.
Right.
But it's not that poor. So I mean, it's become terribly sophisticated and gentrified and all the rest of it. And, oh my goodness. But when I was there, small town.
Small town, so kind of idyllic childhood?
Well, no, boy. It was an interesting childhood.
Right.
I was born in 1943. 1943 is 2 years after Pearl Harbor, which they hardly even remembered to celebrate about a week or so ago. Okay. But Pearl Harbor, when I was growing up, was still one of the most vivid memories in America.
Yeah.
And so when my father got discharged from the armed services, he was over fighting in North Africa. We went to Burbank, California, which was all discharged GIs. And Burbank was where aerospace was in the late 40s. It's where Boeing and Lockheed anyway. It's where where they made all the planes for the armed services at that moment in time. And I remember LA and the San Fernando Valley when it was still orange groves, and they grew some kind of nut here too, and they had pecans, and they had sheep ranches in the San Fernando Valley. And if you look out now, it's a megapolis, and they're putting up wherever the subway stops, they're putting up these huge tall buildings because some urban planners have gotten it into their heads that it's going to be a wonderful life if there's increased density in the urban areas, which of course is making them more and more unlivable.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
so my father moved back to New York, mid-state New York, in I guess around 1953 or 4. The first headline that I remember reading as a small boy was "Stalin dies!"
Wow.
exclamation point on the newspaper. And that must have been, I'd have to look it up, but that must have been like 52 or 3.
Yeah.
And my mother and grandfather were from Highland, New York, and my parents sent me up there every weekend. My parents had a small mom and pop clothing store. This was in the day when you could still work for yourself, and small business was encouraged.
Yeah.
This was in the 50s. And my memory is the influences on I became a prolific reader. I loved reading and going to movies. You?
Yeah. Yes, exactly the same. It was mostly reading. I think when I left home, I think kind of like 18, we decided to count up and I'd got 2,000 books in my bedroom. It was
Wow.
just insane. And I'd read them all. I couldn't honestly remember them all, but it was just like, it was a book in a weekend, or a really thick novel, Thomas Covenant, Tales of Thomas Covenant, that thick book, 600 odd pages, that would take me a week. And just,
Okay.
yeah,
Mine were, I was there at the dawn of science fiction. So
right.
I was reading all Robert Heinlein, Asimov, all the great science fiction writers, but I must have been, I don't know, 10, 11, 12, someplace in there.
Uh-huh.
And they were a huge influence on me. And then the movies, especially all the B movies, all the terrible science fiction movies, the late 50s, them is still one of the great movies of my life. And that's the one about the giant ants.
Oh,
The,
yes. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah. And and I'd go up to Highland and spend every weekend up there because my parents were working 6-day weeks. My mother worked with my father. That's what
Right.
mom and pops were like. You didn't have the money to hire help. You were the help as
Yeah,
well.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and I don't know. I fell in love with movies and books. And at some point in there, I know when I I saw Psycho. Okay, which was that's later. That's
Yeah,
like 1960 or 61.
yeah.
But that's the first time I realized that film was edited, that it was bits of pieces put together. Before then, I'd grown up on the Hammer films, and the AIP films. And the Hammer films were, of course, were all sort of wide shots masters because they had those wonderful sets,
Yeah,
that they did. And it was all heavily saturated, very, very, very colorful. But if you did an insert, it was amazing in a Hammer film. There were, you never got closer than an over the shoulder, I don't think, or a 2-shot. And I don't know. It was in Cohate because I didn't know anybody that it was in the business,
mhm.
and I didn't have any way in. There wasn't anybody I could even talk to. I mean, are you from a small town or?
Yeah, I'm kind of near, one of the Gatwick Airport, grew up near there, but kind of urban, kind of rural, urbanish,
Okay,
not
well,
quite as small,
okay.
and nobody in the family any interest in acting or anything.
No, not
Scientist,
not in me. No, it was inconceivable.
yeah,
My my mother said to me, my parents were Depression era children. They'd been
yeah,
raised, they'd hit their youthful teenage years in the 30s.
Yeah.
and that was the height of the Depression.
Yes.
And that was it was an event that shaped that generation. It's hard to imagine now,
Yeah.
but that's the generation that went off to fight World War II
Yeah. Yeah.
also. But I mean, my mother said to me that I should get a job with the post office because it was a federal job and they couldn't fire you. But I mean, that's how deeply scarred they were by the economic insecurity of the Depression. America didn't recover from the Depression until World War II.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, it was really hand to mouth.
Yeah.
I didn't experience that, but this is from them.
Yes.
But what happened is, I mean, I was born in 43 because my father went off to fight in World War II.
Yeah.
And, you know, they wanted to leave something behind, and it was me.
Yeah.
And he was lucky enough to survive and come back. So anyway, I ended up I ended up growing up in mid-state New York, and there was nobody that had any interest in movies that I could find. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Sorry, I was gonna. No, no, it's fine. So is this why you went to law school?
No, no, no. I did that. What happened is I found a drama teacher who got me into an apprenticeship at Bucks County Playhouse in the summer of my 16th birthday. And from that, I learned about acting classes in New York City.
Right.
And so I started going into New York City on Saturdays to go study at what they then called the HB studio on Bank Street, 22 Bank Street, Herbert Berghoff. I can't remember anything from yesterday, but I can remember pretty well from 50, 60 years ago. Anyway, because I was trying to get closer to film, but there were no film schools. I mean, it's hard to imagine now, but it isn't that long ago. I'm talking about the early 60s.
Right.
And I, I said, okay, I'll be an actor because that was the only thing that I could get, that could get me closer to movies.
Right.
And from that, I got a year at Northwestern Theater School. And Northwestern's a very good Midwestern school
Right.
in Chicago. And they didn't even have a film school. The film school, they had one film class, and it was one room where they had 16 millimeter projectors, and they had cold splicers where you had to wear white gloves, if any of this makes any sense, because it sounds like the year of one. And I got hold of a 16 mil camera there and a guy to help me. And I went out and I shot my first film, and I was 18 or 19. And then that summer, after my first year at Northwestern, I went I went into New York to be an actor, into acting classes, and I got a 7-year contract at Warner Brothers. And and I came out here to LA, and I was 19, I think, and it was 1963. It was the year that JFK was assassinated.
Mm-hmm.
And I was out here under contract to Warner Brothers, and that was when the studios have been wiped out by television, and their whole business model of of having a captive audience that went to the theaters, at least 2 times a week, all that
Mm.
fell apart, and they went into the business of producing TV series, and then that fell apart, and as that was falling apart, I was at Warner Brothers, and I was there as an actor. And what I really did was I haunted the editing rooms, and I haunted the post production. Learning about dubbing and sound and everything. And but they still had the set standing to My Fair Lady, which was the biggest soundstage at Warner Brothers, where the Ascot races were. They had that set was still standing. They had the exterior set to Camelot still standing out where Columbia was. Now I don't know. I guess it's Warner's now too. But that was there, and they were shooting Robin and the Seven Hoods, which was Frank Sinatra and the Rat Pack.
Mm-hmm.
And I would go sneak in the door, and I would stand there and I would watch them. I watched Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin and Sammy Davis Jr. And, and I was like 19 years old and from mid-state New York and didn't know anything at all. So I really wanted to make film, but I don't think I could even express it because at that moment in time, the business was very nepotistic.
Mm.
It was really a matter of whether or not you were born in it, and that didn't include just the executive ranks. It also was the whole union structure that went to IATSE, to the people who really made the films, the workers, the grips, the electricians. That was passed down generation to generation because they were good union jobs. This would probably make sense to you in England. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it was at that point in time, America was very unionized,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so I learned a lot. And then, of course, I was released from contract because all their television series were falling apart. I acted in the last year of 77 Sunset Strip. I did a Temple Houston, which was the name just slipped out of my head, but the very, very good looking guy who played Jesus Christ in King of Kings, I think it was. Oh
Yes,
boy.
I know. I can almost picture the face, but
Yeah, he
it's
was really handsome.
yeah.
And anyway, I mean, I got a taste of it, and I saw the last gasp of the classical film era, is what I saw when I was 19 years old.
So, I mean, because you were lucky enough to do a walk in the spring rain with Anthony Quinn and Ingrid Bergman whilst
That
you were
was
there.
later. I think I
That was
was
later.
that was 1969. I was an actor until about 19. I did that, which I couldn't believe. I was with the woman who was the heroine of Casablanca. I couldn't, I just sat there with my mouth hanging open. The and you know who the stunt coordinator was?
No.
Bruce Lee. Ah, yeah, Bruce Lee.
Wow.
Bruce Lee choreographed my stunts, my fights, and my death. Anyway, but what I started doing was I got in the actor's studio in
Ah,
L.A. and maybe around 1968. It was still Lee Strasberg, and they had a playwrights wing, and you do the writers there would put their one act plays up, and there were a lot of screenwriters there, and they put up their one act plays, and they'd even direct them, and I started acting in them, and I met a lot of writers then who were very hot in the business, and one of them was Jim Bridges, who directed Paper Chase among other things. And there were a number of them, but I can't remember the names now anymore. But that gave me, for the first time, it gave me the idea that if I could write a screenplay, I might be able to direct it, because that's what they were all trying to do. Now I'm back 1968, 9, 70. And at the same time, because I'm a nice middle class boy, I went back, I got myself back into college at UCLA. And this was when it was inexpensive enough. You could work and put yourself through college at the same time. And I had acting, and I was also doing commercials. And I was doing commercials in front of the camera, but also behind the camera, picking up extra day work, day jobbing. I
Right.
can't remember, but it was a lot of money. It was like 50, $75 a day,
Wow.
for lugging equipment around, And so I was doing all that and going to UCLA at the same time. And I had Walk in the Spring Rain, and then I was the co-star or the co-lead in a pilot called The Young Lawyers, along with Salmon King and Judy Pace. I was acting under the name of Tom Fielding. There was another Tom Holland when I came into the guild. He was a voiceover artist.
Right.
And then he passed. And now there's a British kid named Tom Holland. Tom Holland seems to have been a very popular name all my life. Anyway, when I went back to school and I started writing, I used my real name of Tom Holland and not Tom Fielding, but all the acting credits are under Tom Fielding. I worked a lot as an actor, I really did.
Right.
But the my mother was always shouting in my ear, have something to back it up,
Ah,
because that obviously isn't the most stable of yeah, 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 yeah. So I graduated UCLA, I think 1971. And by that time I was writing screenplays
right.
badly. But I mean, I thought, well, I better have some kind of a degree that means something, and having a bachelor of science, or what, a bachelor of arts in political science wasn't worth very much. So I went to law school at UCLA, and I went through the first year, and I realized I had made a terrible mistake. I mean, I was really a fish out of water. I couldn't keep my eyes open for boredom, and but it was easier to say I was in law school than that I was an aspiring screenwriter. And if you know anything about law school, at least here in America, if you make it through the first year, you can really sort of coast for the next two,
Right.
because the first year is the one where they make it so tough they wash you out. And I
Right.
got through that. So I figured, what the hell? I kept on going to law school. I didn't really go. I was writing screenplays, and I was using the notes of a very, very bright guy a year ahead of me called Peter Deckham, lawyer. And I went through the last 2 years of law school on somebody else's notes, but I was writing screenplays. And then I took the bar, and while I was waiting to find out whether or not I passed, I sold my first screenplay. Okay, so I must have been I was like 30 or 31 years old. And I remember one of the screenplays, the title of one of the screenplays was The View from 30, which tells you what my age was. And I sold my first screenplay. I have a photocopy of the check on the wall, believe it or not. And the I thought to myself, well, I've been poor so long as a student, that I might as well take a roll of the dice with the writing. And because I'm used to being poor, I can be poor for a few more years or whatever and see what happens. And I had the law degree and I had passed the bar. So I had that in my back pocket, or what my mother would have called something to fall back on.
Right.
And I remember going to my first law school reunion, and everybody else was working and buying their first house and getting married, and I was still starving to death. And I thought, oh my goodness, I have made a horrible mistake here. But there you are. And then I guess after about 5 years after I passed the bar, I started to sell as a screenwriter. So I mean, so when people ask me, well, how do you become a screenwriter? How do you become a director? I say everybody has their own journey because God knows mine zigzagged all across the place. What about you?
Well,
How did you get here?
how did I get here? Basically, school, interviewed for the post office, funnily enough, after school, got into the tax office, went to drama school. Shortly thereafter, met a young man called Clive Barker, who asked me to be in a film. And that's how I ended up with Hellraiser. And that's, been plugging away at different things and leaving the business, coming back to the business, all that kind of thing. But
Clive has been very kind to me over the years. Clive gave me a great blurb on my book, The Notch, which is on Amazon Kindle, everybody. But anyway, Clive, Clive has been extremely supportive. And I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, it's because that's the man I know. He's incredibly encouraging. He's always encouraging me to write and get my finger out and actually put pen to paper.
Well, he told me the story that he'd been at a horror convention in Texas back in 1984, and the night that Fright Night opened, he and a number of other of his friends from the horror convention went to see it. And Fright Night was one of the great evenings of his life, which is why he's always been kindly disposed towards me, which is a lovely story. And I had read, I came across Book of Blood, what was it, Book of Blood?
Books of Blood. Yeah.
Books, plural.
Plural, yeah.
And I came across that when just after Fright Night had come out. I was on my way to Sitges, to the film festival, to premiere Fright Night there, which was probably 1985. And I stopped in England on the way through, and people were talking about Clive Barker and Books of Blood. And that's when I started to read him.
Yeah. Because I'd known him once those were being published, and in fact, modeled for the front covers of some of the British. You can see me with my knife sticking out of my head and so on.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, but don't young people ask you, how did you ever become?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And again, it's that. I think it's the old adages, isn't it, Tom? It's it's a hell of a lot of hard work. It's a hell of a lot of luck as well. It's just the right thing. But I think the hard work goes into being prepared for the luck when it happens, so you can take the.
Well, yes. I mean, I can't underline that enough. I'll also say perseverance is a synonym for luck.
Yes.
But I'll also tell you everything that my mother said to me is true too. It's nice if you have skills or a second, avocation besides the arts to back it up, because I mean, I have a number of friends who are up against it at this point, for various reasons. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But you've mentioned Fright Night, but I wanted to go back a little bit earlier, because before you did Fright Night, you wrote Psycho 2. Speaking of Psycho being a huge influence, how did it come about that you got the gig of writing Psycho 2?
I had, after almost, if I graduated UCLA Law School in 1974, 5 years later, 1979, 1980, I had my first film that I had written released. It was called The Beast Within.
Right.
Okay. And it was United Artists, and it was released concurrently with the bankruptcy of United Artists because of Michael Cimino's Western movie Heaven's Gate, which bankrupted the company. And The Beast Within is the last theatrical release of United Artists before it went bankrupt, and it was a success. but financially at the theaters, but nobody knew because all the publicity and everything was about how Heaven's Gate had ruined, United Artists, and they
Mm.
wrote a book on it. I forget what the title is. So I finally, after 5, 6 years, have my first movie made, and nobody knew. And the movie had been successful, but nobody knew. So it did absolutely nothing for my writing career. I mean, in other words, I was still, and so in 1982, Richard Franklin, the Australian director, called me up. He'd read one of my scripts and really liked it, and he was doing the sequel to Psycho. And A, nobody did sequels then. B, it wasn't a theatrical, it was an early cable movie. If you look
Oh,
on the
wow.
credits, it says Oak Communications, which was a cable service in San Diego. So what Universal did was they made a deal to sell a cable movie with a sequel of Psycho, because nobody thought that it would be worth anything, nor thought that it would attract any attention. And I got to meet with Richard because every more established writer in Hollywood had turned it down. Nobody wanted to write a sequel to Psycho, because Psycho was already at that point was already a classic, and everybody knew that they were going to get killed, raped, decimated for having the temerity to do a sequel to the classic horror film. And so I got an opportunity, and I was so desperate for a job and for a chance to establish myself. Now remember, I'm trying not just to become a writer, a screenwriter. I'm trying to use screenwriting to get an opportunity to direct.
Right.
Okay, so I got Psycho too, and I said to Richard, I said, the only way that this is going to work is if we get Tony Perkins to play Norman Bates. No Tony, nobody's going to care about a sequel to Psycho 2. And Richard, the Australian director, knew he was going to get killed too for daring to direct the sequel to Psycho. Richard graduated USC, and working with him was like having an elongated graduate course in filmmaking, specifically Hitchcock and John Ford.
Hmm.
They were his two heroes, which is not bad people to have as heroes. And I worked harder on that screenplay than I think I have on any other, because I had to be faithful to the given circumstances of the original, because I figured that was the best protection I had against the critics savaging me. And you knew going in they were going to savage you. And then the other problem, I had to write a script that was actor's bait to get Tony Perkins to come back and play Norman. And I had the best, having been and being an actor. Actually, I stopped acting in 1982. Before this, with Winds of War, which was a big mini series at the time.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that was my last. Reuben Cannon was the
Right.
casting director. Thank you, Reuben. He cast me in it. I knew how to write a character arc that would attract an actor. And one of the great things about Psycho, the original, was it made you feel sorry for the serial killer Norman.
Mm.
It didn't explain why. Well, you knew it was his mother, but
Yeah.
then, this was in the Freudian time, and everything was mom's fault,
Yeah.
The so I I wrote, I think a great part for Norman Bates, and it worked. Tony read it and he loved it. He loved the part of Norman Bates, the acting,
Hmm.
and he said yes. And Universal, who thought they had a throwaway little movie with Psycho 2, they put out a press release saying Tony Perkins is back to play Norman Bates in Psycho 2. And the entire world went crazy. And it was at that point that Universal said, hey, maybe this is more than a cable movie. Maybe this is a feature film. Not that they gave us any money, because they didn't. We did that movie without the studio overhead for $5 million, which even then was nothing.
Yeah.
Okay. That's how much faith Universal had in it. And I, I was like lightning striking. It was the last get together of everybody who had really worked with Alfred Hitchcock. And when it was released in the summer of 1982, people don't remember this now, but it was the second biggest grossing movie in the summer of 1982, after the release of the first sequel to Star Wars. So right after Star Wars was Psycho 2. And that launched my career.
Right.
That
Right.
really launched it. But think of it now, Nicholas. I've been working since 1963, and I'm talking now 1982. So almost 20 years
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
get a career going.
Which comes back to the perseverance that you were referring to earlier.
But you need some luck, like you're talking about
Yeah.
Clive casting you.
Yeah.
You need some luck. But I mean, I don't want to sell you want to sell hope to all the younger people that are watching this,
Hmm.
but you want to sell some reality too, because since I've spent my life doing this and have all kinds of friends who are actors, almost all of them have second jobs.
Yeah.
I mean, let's be honest about it, especially acting. So, a little bit of caution is required also.
Yes, it's what we always used to refer to as pay the rent jobs.
Yes, yes.
That is the reality of an actor's life, is that you've just got to have a pay the rent job, because
That's
I
right.
think Equity, the actors union over here, which I'm sure you're familiar with, publish the figures to, saying the number of people who actually make a career is like in single digit percentages of the union.
Infinitesimal,
Yeah.
infinitesimal.
Yeah.
And we just to now that I'll segue for a second. We just had something horrible happen here. SAG, Screen Actors Guild,
Mhm.
had guaranteed lifetime health to all the actors who had at least 20 years, 20 qualifying years, and your pension and your health plan vested.
Mhm.
SAG just broke that agreement, obviated that agreement. And everybody who's over 65 who thought that they and their spouse had health care through the union was told no, they don't, because the union was going broke in the health care, a lot because of COVID,
Of
because
course.
COVID's just crushed the business here. So I mean, I have a number of friends now who are I can't lie about it. I'd love to tell you I'm still 23, but unfortunately it's not true, or fortunately it's not true. I don't think I want to go through it again anyway. But I can't even claim to be 40 or 50. But the that's been a terrible, terrible thing for
Yeah.
so many of my friends, because
Yeah.
now they have to pay for an HMO, which is what they call them here. These health groups
Mm,
here.
mm, mm.
It's I think it's amounted to about $7,000 more a year for them, and then another 7,000 for their wives or their partners. So I mean, all of a sudden, people who thought that they were covered because they'd spent so many years in the union making a
Mm.
living and paying union dues,
Yeah.
the union has broken that agreement,
Yeah.
and that has caused a huge furor here in Hollywood. And they just did a class action suit, which is a lawsuit to try to stop the union from doing it. But the union, of course, is broke. So
You,
because I mean, so it's a horrible mess.
yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm
Well,
sorry.
so
That's
yeah, but
yeah.
important and very important. The I mean, obviously, once you'd done Psycho 2, you had that big success, and I think your next really big project from you is when you really get to do what you were hoping to do all the time, which is to write and direct, and that is with Fright Night. Was that a short gestation for the script of Fright Night? Did that just come and then happen quickly after Psycho 2, or was that something you've been working on anyway?
I I I stayed with Richard Franklin and I wrote Cloak and Dagger,
Right,
which was a juvenile version of supposedly of The Window, which was the adolescent version of Rear Window by the same writer,
right.
a book writer, and the name just popped out of my head naturally. The and supposedly Cloak and Dagger was an original, but the book it was based on, The Window, was a boy looks out the window, sees a murder next door. It's a cry wolf story.
Yeah,
And I said, I said, it's very hard to modernize this, Richard. And if you really wanted to make this, with looking at something happening out the window, the kid should be a horror movie fan and he should become convinced that his next door neighbor is a vampire. That's an original movie that would draw people. And Richard said, "You're crazy. That's an insane idea." Okay. And I couldn't convince anybody at Universal either. They said, "No, we want The Window." The kid sees. So that ended up being a kid playing a role playing game who sees a spy being murdered and inadvertently ends up with the plans that everybody's after. And
yeah.
that's Cloak and Dagger, which I thought was a terrific movie, but it seems like it's forgotten now. But it was very popular with all the adolescent boys who grew up in the 90s.
Well,
And
I
I'm
watched
sorry.
it I watched it just recently. I'd not heard of it before I heard that you were coming on the show, I have to admit. And I was thinking, the relationship between the kid and his father at the beginning is just heartbreaking.
Thank you.
When you realize what's going on once you've set up the whole thing before you get it. And I love the twist of the father, the actor who plays the father.
Dabney Coleman.
Thank you. Um, you see, your memory is
Yeah.
better than mine. I only watched it the other day. Um, also plays the kid's imaginary spy friend. Um, I think it's incredibly effective. I was surprised because I thought, oh, this is a
Jack
kind of a
Black.
Disney kids movie when I first started watching it, but actually it goes quite dark.
I was trying to go for it being moving at the end, moving you to tears.
Right.
I think the dramatic intention was right. How how well it turned out. How
Mm,
thoroughly was actuated. I don't really know. I mean, but I know that a lot of people loved it.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
so anyway, so that was where I got the
Right.
idea for Fright Night,
Right.
and then I had an experience with a British director who you will know. I wrote a script called Scream for Help, and Michael Winner
Oh,
was hired to direct it. I subsequently had lunch with him at one of the best restaurants in LA because he was a gourmand or a
yeah.
gourmet.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what Michael did was, I think because of the success of Death Wish, uh, he thought that the more dialogue he cut out, the stronger the movie was. So as he said to me at dinner, he said, "Well, I shot your script. I mean, so you can't blame me for how it turned out. It turned out almost unreleasable, by the way." So what he did was he cut all the dialogue between the characters. So you never understood what was happening or the character arcs or why people were doing what they were doing. And because he tried to take it was a girl discovers that her stepfather is having an affair and is trying to murder her mother,
Right.
and nobody believes her. It's a variation, I guess you could say, on Fright Night. But by the time Michael Winter got through with it, it looked like an action film or Home Alone, with a kid trying to survive, a stepfather trying to kill her in the house. But it didn't have anything to do with what it didn't have any of the texture, any of the acting scenes that I wrote. And Michael was to me over lunch was terribly charming. I mean, he was and I'm not I really don't understand British society, but he I don't know if you call him upper class or not, but he had uh,
Mm,
he had expensive tastes.
yeah.
Okay, I mean, there was obviously a lot of money there, and his passion was food and wine.
Yeah.
And I'm from mid-state New York, farm country, and I don't know anything about those things. I sort of, I've sort of been around people, who can do that, but I've never been terrific at that. Anyway, uh, after the experience of Scream for Help, I thought, well, well, I couldn't sell this great idea called Fright Night. My last script was just savaged by the director. I've always wanted to direct. I can't do any worse. And I was very hot as a screenwriter. And I wrote Fright Night. And I probably had maybe the best experience I've ever had writing a screenplay with Fright Night, because I was tickled pink and I was laughing half the time. I was on the floor like this saying, "Oh, that's so funny. That's so funny." I mean, I just thought it was just a delightful. And I was writing something that I loved because it was me or my experience growing up watching Hammer films in the late 50s into the 60s, the Hammer
Oh,
films and the AIP films.
right.
And so I sent it out there, and Hollywood, the studios offered to buy it if I didn't direct. And because of the experience with Scream for Help, I just thought, well, I can't do any worse. And if I'm going to direct, now's the time. I was like 41, I think 41, 42 years old, which now, of course, seems impossibly young. And and so I insisted on directing it. And the head of Columbia was a man named Guy McElwain, and I had met him socially back in the 70s through another Brit, Pamela Mason. Do you
Right.
know the name Pamela Mason?
Not familiar.
She was the wife of James Mason,
Ah,
and she was British. And James, who was British also, had married well. Pamela Mason was the daughter of an Englishman who owned one of the major studios in London. And
ah,
I don't remember the studio myself, but
Ealing, possibly. I can check it. I'll check it. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, look her up because she became famous here. She was one of the first talk show hosts on radio,
Right.
and she really made a cultural impact. And her daughter, Portland Mason, was a celebrity almost in her own right because the parents had raised her uh, in such a progressive fashion.
Right. Right.
And I was invited to the house through another girl that I met when I was going out acting on jobs acting, and she was working for a casting director, Geiler, Sue Geiler, Sue Guy, Giler,
Right.
who was another famous Hollywood family. Her brother was a successful screenwriter, and I don't remember his name. Anyway, Pamela Mason had a Sunday soiree, but they called them something else in those days. But the most interesting people in Hollywood were invited every Sunday. There's they used to have them in Paris. You
Right.
know, you'd have a hostess, and they would have very interesting intellectual
Uh-huh.
and cultural elite people there. And I was invited to a number of those where once again I walked around with my mouth hanging open, but I met Guy McElwain, who was a huge agent. He represented Steven Spielberg, and he ended up running Columbia. So when I came in for the meeting on Fright Night as a writer director, he recognized me from 6 or 7 years previous at these Sunday meetings. And at these Sunday meetings, I met the British critic who was such a huge cultural figure at the time who died of emphysema. And but he was absolutely a giant culturally in England, and then he'd come over here, and I don't remember his name either. But anyway, I mean, it was. I meant Gregory Peck, Milton Berle, Johnny Carson's sidekick, famous John Dean, the guy from the Nixon trials, you know, who stabbed Nixon in the back was his name. His last name was Dean. But I
Yes.
mean, it was this amazing potpourri of intellectual and writers and actors, and it was old Hollywood again. These people were all much older than I was. I was there with the children of Pamela Mason. But anyway, I met Guy McElwain. So when I went in for the interview on Fright Night at Columbia, Guy was running Columbia at the time, says, I know you. And it gave me a kind of credibility. And I had become very successful as a screenwriter. And he took a roll of the dice and gave me Fright Night to direct.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, so I mean, it just luck, but a lot of hard work too.
Yeah.
The the and it was they had one slot left in their release schedule, and they put in the throwaway film that they put no money into, and it was called Fright Night. Okay, and
Uh-huh.
and shooting at the same time on the same lot. It was the old David Selznick lot down on down in Culver City, and the big movie with that Columbia had all their hopes on was called Perfect, which I think had just finished shooting, and they put a lot of money into that, and that was Jamie Lee Curtis
Right.
and John Travolta.
Right.
Okay, and that was what they thought was going to be their killer movie, because the two actors were so bloody hot.
Yeah.
And what happened with Fright Night was they they had had a huge success with Ghostbusters, and the hottest uh, effects team in Hollywood at the time was Richard Edlund, and they thought, well, we'll keep them on salary here at Columbia so they can do our bigger effects productions, and in the meantime, we'll throw them this bone called Fright Night to give them a few bucks to keep them on salary. So I ended up with the premier effects team in Hollywood. They're just coming off of Ghostbusters
Wow.
onto my little film for Fright Night. That's luck,
Yeah.
okay? Because I didn't know. Well, I knew, but I didn't. But so they brought in. It was not only Richard Edlund doing the visual effects, but it was Steve Johnson and Randy Cook doing the in-camera
Hmm.
effects. You know, the blood, the gore, the transition from the werewolf, but coming, you know, Chris Sarandon jumping off the balcony
Mm.
and turning into the bat on the way down.
Yeah.
That's a shadow on the wall, and that's Richard Edlund doing, you know, doing with a printer, doing
A
doing
Matt.
the transition. Yeah, yeah, Matt Printer. The so I mean, just extraordinary luck. And then I ended up with a wonderful cast, and I also ended up with a solid 2 weeks of rehearsals. You know, I well, you know, I did just I just everybody associated with that film. Uh, you know, all these people who are now gone, but whatever, everybody was pulling in the same direction. Everybody was terribly supportive. We didn't have any money, but we had time. We were shooting in Hollywood. The production manager, line producer, was a wonderful guy called Jerry Barowitz, and he was terrific. The head of production at the studio was had put he put together this wonderful team of production for me, and I'm just I mean, so it was blessed. I
Yeah.
mean, and the whole thing was blessed. And I've never had that much luck in any movie ever since. You know, I mean, so Fright Night, and if I say so myself, the script was terrific. You know, so and I ended up I got Chris Sarandon and Roddy McDowall. And Roddy was like having a supportive uncle. You know, it's hard to explain, but he he was terribly supportive, and he led the actors. He led the team, and Chris Sarandon, who was the most heavyweight actor involved, who I had to go through a lot of work to convince him because he was gun shy, and I can tell you why he was gun shy. He got wiped out with a movie called Lipstick, which hadn't ended well, which was Michael Winner again, and Michael Winner had killed him. You know, acting wise in that movie, you'd have to ask Chris. Well, you had him on, or
Yeah.
you have him on
Yeah.
for Christmas Eve.
Yeah.
Too bad if you'd known this, you could have asked him. Would have been a
He
dark.
mentioned he mentioned his no. Funnily enough, it came up in conversation as
It
being
did.
the
It
worst,
did.
the worst
Well, but
experience he'd ever had.
that was his chance of being a movie star, and if that had worked, but then he came back and he gave a brilliant performance in Fright Night. So anyway, this little film that nobody was paying attention to, all of a sudden it cut together, and people started looking at it and they went, "Oh my goodness." I remember Guy McElwain saying to me as we walked out of the first screening where I showed it to all the executives, he said to somebody ahead of me, "It's going to be ironic if my time as head of Columbia is going to be known not for any of these big movies that we've done, but for Fright Night." That's the ambivalence, because you got to remember, horror films were always the redheaded stepchild.
Right.
I mean, they were always looked down on.
Right.
You know, I mean, and everybody, I could go on and on. Anyway, I'm talking and I shouldn't. You're more interesting than I am, I'm
No,
sure.
this is so not true, Tom. This is so not true. And we've not even got as far as Child's Play. But before we get to Child's Play, I did want to two questions. I read recently that you're working on a sequel to Fright Night.
I am right. When I finish talking to you, I will go back to the book. Yes, that's right.
Right. It's going well.
Yes, it is, in between other projects and things coming up and all that. And
Right.
the busyness of trying to make a living at the same time.
Sure.
I'm trying to write novels. I would like to write novels because they are the thing themselves. And I've been trying to write novels since I was 13 years old. I gave up in despair that I couldn't write novels and wrote screenplays.
Right.
And
Right.
screenplays finally are a blueprint for the movie. They're not the thing themselves.
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, and secondly, in terms of business, the intellectual property is yours if you write a book on spec.
Yeah.
It isn't yours if you write a screenplay for hire,
Yeah.
and that
Yeah.
somebody's paid you. But
Yeah.
almost everything I've written has been an original, even though there's been a screenplay preceding me, or there's been a book or whatever. Everything I've pretty much written has been an original out of my head, and but I didn't get paid that way anyway.
Right. 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 Okay. Well,
Hard, cruel facts of life.
yes. Yes. But I did want to ask you, as I do want to talk about child's play if we may briefly, but Fatal Beauty in 1987, you directed Whoopi Goldberg in a film called Fatal Beauty. And I have to say, again, it was not one I was familiar with. I was blown away by Whoopi Goldberg, because you've managed to get out of her both the comedic performance that I think we're used to seeing, but incredibly dramatic, moving performance as well. How did you get involved with the Fatal Beauty?
Everybody in Hollywood that I knew, and these again are Brits, Guy Green and his wife, Josephine. Guy Green directed me in Walk in the Spring Rain. He also won the Academy Award in 1948 for Great Expectations. The David Lean film?
Yes. Yeah.
He was
Yes.
he was David Lean's cinematographer, Guy Green.
Wow.
And they were part of the Hollywood establishment. Now it's all probably gone, but these were all the ladies who lunched at the Academy Awards. And everybody, and I respected them enormously because they were the older, especially him, older role models.
Mm.
The guy was a cinematographer who became a director, but it was really always a brilliant, brilliant, brilliant cinematographer. But they all told me that I had to immediately get out of horror because I'd had a success with Fright Night. If I didn't immediately take something that was out of the genre, I would be doing horror forever.
Right.
And it was the ghetto, it was the basement, it got no respect. You'd never get an Academy Award nomination, all this stuff. But I mean, I didn't really understand, but I sort of understood. And interestingly enough, John Landis is a friend, and I saw recently, I don't know, I was doing something with John, and John feels the same way about comedy. He feels that comedy gets no respect in Hollywood, which always to me, I mean, you know, to me, he was one of the great directors of the 80s and 90s into the 2000s. But he felt that the genre he was king of, comedy, was the one that was always looked down on. Anyway, they all told me that the people who were older than I was, who knew more, told me I immediately had to get out of horror. So I took Fatal Beauty. Fatal Beauty had started out as what they call guns and garter belts of the genre. And it was Cher. When I signed on, it was Cher. But I had seen, just previous to that, I'd seen The Color Purple, and which I thought was just wonderful. And I thought so many of the actors were great, Oprah and Whoopi, especially Whoopi. And Cher bailed on the movie. And so I didn't have a star. And I was going to say, well, I'll move on to something else. And Alan Ladd Jr. called me up, who was head of the studio, and said, what about Whoopi Goldberg? My first reaction was, well, yes, it'd be great if we had a comedy. If we had Beverly Hills Cop, it'd be great, but we don't have that. We have a noir thriller. How are you going to get Whoopi to do, and I loved her work. I got talked into it. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And the movie my memory is the movie was critically savaged because they didn't want Whoopi Goldberg playing a tough ass cop. They wanted her to be, oh, I know, I don't know what's proper to say, Nick, anymore. You know, I'm sort of beyond PC,
Mm-hmm.
you know, but I mean, I guess they wanted her to be the good black woman.
Yeah.
You know, they didn't want her to be the black cop that was shooting bad guys, which was the script,
Yeah.
you know. So I had a I had an interesting time working with her. And the studio at the same time was pushing me to make it comedic, but I didn't have a comedic script, you know. So
Uh,
I was dancing a line, and at the same time, Whoopi's impulses were for drama, and there was drama in the script. So I was
mm,
trying to get that at the same time. And I thank you for saying that about how great she was. I thought she gave a terrific performance, and Whoopi told me that, you know, it was in terms of performance, it was her most praised movie from her fans, which I think is terrific. But it seems to me now that it's forgotten, like Cloak and Dagger is forgotten.
mm,
And I thought Cloak and Dagger was a hell of a movie. So, you know, I I don't it's hard figuring out why some and why not others. But anyway, I had a great time with Whoopi, and I think she's a terrifically talented person.
sure. Sure.
Well, what I'll tell you what she is. If you want comedy from her, you got to write the lines, okay? But she
Mm-hmm.
is a fabulous mime, okay? I mean, she'll have you on the floor with that. You know, she just, you know, I don't know where that comes from. So, you know, she's just very, very talented, but it's she's not Robin Williams either.
No.
You know, it's not that overt comedy because there's an element of seriousness and pathos to her.
Yeah.
Her real name is Karen Johnson, I think, and she was on welfare out of Berkeley, California, which is where she came from. But
Wow.
yeah. But
Wow.
she's a she's a great mime, you know. So anyway,
Right. Okay. Well, again, briefly, because I'm conscious of being running over time.
well, I'm sorry.
No, no. Listen, I mean, I just don't want to keep you too long, but we can't not talk about Child's Play, where you got to work with Chris Sarandon again. And you've probably answered an awful lot of these questions, but I was curious about how you found Alex Vincent to play the boy, because that's an extraordinary performance from somebody who's really very young.
7 years old. I went and I was casting here in LA, and I couldn't find a real boy, a real little boy that had a vulnerability. And I went back to New York City, and I was looking at kids there, and I remember, and Alex came in, and I don't know, he was, how do you say, there was something that was a little bit depressed about him at 7 years old.
Mm,
And I remember getting under the table and playing with toys with him, and he took direction. I mean, I mean, if I told him or communicated with him, he would try to do what I said, but he stayed real. Now, later on, I found out his parents were in the middle of a divorce. And I think at 7 years old, I think that was the emotional turmoil that I sensed in him,
mm,
or what was vulnerable about him. And that's how I found him, and that's why I cast him,
right,
because he wasn't a kid actor. I don't think he'd ever had I think he'd done some commercials, but I don't think he'd ever had a part before,
right.
you know. And so, and he was, and I could bring him to tears, which I needed for one scene.
Mm,
That scene where Chucky's coming and he's locked in the hospital room in the mental institution. And
oh, yes.
I knew that I could do that. And he always stayed, to me, believable. There was no gloss about him.
Mm,
You know, there was a pathos about him that was real. And he hadn't gone to the Disney School of Acting.
Right. Right. He is extraordinary. Yeah. Yeah. An amazing performance, and a hugely successful film. Now, before we wrap up, and I've got some set questions I'd like to ask you called the luggage in the crypt. But before we get to that, you were talking earlier on about your novel, The Notch, which is, when was this published?
I think it was the beginning of, I'll tell you when it was. It was just as COVID came out in March, because it got very, very good trade reviews. And I thought, oh my goodness, I'm on my way. And I got very, very good blurbs from people like Clive Barker and John Landis and Greg Nicotero. And I mean, really, people said lovely things. And so they launched the book, and COVID hits, and COVID kills everything, and just buried you. So everybody who's listening, who's aspiring, you need a bit of luck.
Yeah.
I mean, if COVID hadn't hit, the book would have been much better known than it is, and it would have sold more. So I mean, the review I got great in Publishers Weekly. I got a great review. I got a great review in the book, whatever the trade publications are.
Right.
But it would have sold to the libraries off of the trade publication reviews. The libraries were shut down. I mean, so this is this very frustrating, and all I can say to myself, to you, to anybody else out there who's aspiring, all you can do is keep on trying.
Mm.
I mean, I don't know what else any of us do, and it doesn't get any easier.
Yeah.
Truth.
Yeah.
Truth.
Yeah. Can you give us just an idea of what the book's about?
Oh,
your
well,
blurb.
The Notch is about an opportunity for redemption, which I'm big on. It's a boy appears out of the sun in the middle of the desert, and he never says a word, but he seems to have a journey that he's on, and as he's heading for the city, for Tucson, and people pick him up, they give him rides, they drop him off, whatever, and whoever he's with, if they have something wrong with them, and it goes from having a hangnail to a guy who's badly burned his hand, he touches them and they're healed. So you have an 11-year-old boy who's autistic, seemingly autistic, who's a healer. And then in the big city, he sees a girl's pet dog is hit by a car and killed, and the girl is brokenhearted and weeping. And the 10, 11-year-old boy walks over and he touches the dog, and the dog comes back to life. And people record it on their video phones, on their iPhones, and it goes worldwide. Okay. At the same time, a pandemic hits, and I wrote this before COVID, so I had no idea. But a pandemic hits that I call the coughing sickness, and hundreds of thousands of people start to die of this pandemic. But at the same time, everybody who's seen there's these videos of this boy healing the dogs and getting testaments from other people, and they never clearly see his face. They see him from the back, they see him from the side, but they don't see his face. He becomes the most valuable boy in the world, because everybody who's sick, including the rich and powerful, want this kid to touch them. But at the same time, he gets picked up by a bunch of teenage thieves and whores, okay? And they think they've got something, and they think the kid is a fake. They think that he just looks like, and they're going to sell him to the loan shark and pay off their debts. The loan shark has stomach cancer. They're going to get the loan shark back that way. So they sell him to the loan shark. He touches the loan shark. Nothing happens. The loan shark throws him out, almost kills him and throws him out. And then about 3 or 4 hours later, the stomach cancer is gone. So now the loan shark wants the kid. And the kid is with 5 terrible teenage, whores and thieves. And they start to realize that the kids start to realize they have the real boy.
Yeah.
And now it becomes a moral choice. What do
Wow.
they do?
Wow.
Do they sell them for the money to the people who are going to use them? And every time the kid heals somebody, it almost exhausts them. And they realize that if the kid is forced to do 2 or 3 healings in a row, it's going to kill him. He needs time to recover. So it's a moral choice. And the other thing that happens is the CIA and the FBI and everybody gets a hold of, knows what wants this kid. And all these great, all the national defense industry and all this, they realize that there's a correlation between when the kid does something good, somebody does something good to the kid, the coughing sickness stops. When somebody does something bad to the kid, it takes off again, killing hundreds of thousands more
Don't
people.
tell me anymore. This sounds so exciting.
Yeah, and so I mean, I think it's just terrific, and everybody who's read it has loved it, and I hope that the word gets out. But that's what I've been doing, and now I'm doing this. Then I'm writing the sequel to Fright Night, and I'm writing that as a novel. I have, because it was an original, I have the literary and dramatic rights. I don't have the movie rights, but I have the literary and dramatic rights to Fright Night. They're mine. Somehow, by the grace of God, I held on to them. So I'm writing the novel. The sequel to Fright Night is the novel, and
Oh,
that's what I'm doing now. And thank you so much for all this. This is really nice of you. Is there anything else I can say, Nick?
just very briefly, if you'd mind playing a very brief game, I'm just going to throw you some questions. If I ask you to narrow down choices, a favorite film, basically.
Oh boy. Oh boy. Favorite? Well, the Psycho was one of the was the huge discovery for me watching films, but I wouldn't say it was. I don't know if I'd say it was the favorite or not. Being there, I mean, I love that. I mean, anything with Peter Sellers in
Peter
it,
Sellers, yeah.
all the detective films, all
Chauncey
those great,
Gardner.
I mean, huge films that I enjoyed, loved. Anything with, well, not anything, but almost anything with Humphrey Bogart. People have forgotten how wonderful, Ingrid Bergman was. I mean, all those Hitchcock films
Yeah.
that she did, the one with Cary Grant. That's an endless list.
Right.
I'm sorry,
No. It's always
Inspector Clouseau, anything for a laugh.
I like to challenge my guests, if I may. A book, any particular book?
Oh boy, Dune. Dune. I can't wait to see the movie.
Yeah.
They've never been able to pull the movie off yet.
No, and because the new one, I remember reading it and just going, "Wow, this is world creating." And
it was the last sort of amazing book. I've read it about 5 or 6. I've reread it about 5 or 6 times,
right,
trying to figure out how he did it, because none of his sequels were as good.
Yeah, yeah, often the way.
I mean, look, the Hellbound Heart, Clive, is a novella.
Yeah,
Absolutely brilliant. The Stand by Stephen King, life-changing. I'd never seen that. Stephen brought horror to the middle class. The horror now is one of the most popular genres and most consistently remunerated. Thank you, Stephen King. And people, because they're younger, they don't have a historical perspective on this.
yeah.
But before Stephen, horror novels were in the basement. They were something that nice
Green
people
covers,
didn't read.
Dennis Wheatley. They were most in the UK. It was Dennis Wheatley novels.
Well, that's The Devil Rides Out.
Yeah.
All those? Yes, he was. He was terrific, right?
Yeah. Was
Dennis Wheatley comparable to Stephen King?
No, completely different. I mean, Dennis Wheatley is a much older generation apart from anything else, but huge, again, middle class, but very English, incredibly English. And upper, public school. And really interesting. But I read them all under the bedclothes with my
Well,
torch.
I read a couple, Inspector General, something like that.
Ooh,
He
sounds
wrote,
familiar.
I know. Well, I got interested in him maybe 10 years ago and read some of him.
Right.
But yes, but because he wrote, yes, and
Yeah.
yes, I know.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
What
anyway, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I didn't, but an album, a musical album. Are you fond of music?
Yeah, I love music, but what did you say?
An album, any particular album you'd recommend to people?
Oh, music album.
Yeah.
Oh my God, no, not at this point. I mean, streaming has destroyed music. I listen to music, but I'm listening to the rock and rollers of my era.
Right.
I don't think that as I said, I'm Fleetwood Mac, Bob's, of the Seeger,
Yeah. Yeah.
oh God, they've the Beatles, now they're selling off their catalogs. Bob Dylan just sold his catalog for $300 million.
Yes. Yeah.
You
And
know,
Dolly
in
Parton's
my
too.
generation, he was the culture. Yeah, he was the cultural touchstone.
Yeah. Yeah.
The yeah,
Yeah.
so I don't. That business is in tumult too.
Yeah. What about a favorite food? Do you have a favorite food?
Tomato soup and grilled cheese sandwiches, which are the comfort food in America.
Oh, tomato soup, cup of soups I have downstairs at least once a week with crumpets in my case. But yeah,
Well,
tomato soup.
that's why Tony Perkins in Psycho 2 has a toasted cheese sandwich, because that they in Australia they called it grilled cheese. They call toasted cheese in Australia, but it's a comfort food. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. What about a piece of visual art?
Oh boy, the two hands of Rodin, the hands together praying.
Yes. Yeah, yeah. I know. I've seen it. I, I've
The
been to the
the
Rodin Museum and I think they've got a replica there. But I know the one you mean. It's a beautiful piece. Absolutely beautiful piece. And what about a luxury, a comfort thing, something
Oh boy.
just to make
You
life
know,
sweet?
I have them and I never wear them. I got a Rolex watch during Fright Night. I think it's called the Pantera,
Right.
and I don't wear it because it's too clunky, and I find that I type so much that I keep my hands, totally, without.
Yep.
I went over and did a podcast with Danielle Harris,
Right.
who's a yes, she's
Y-
just terrific,
Yeah.
and her husband trades or did trade in Rolexes, and I brought it with me for him to value, and I almost fell over. He told me that the Pantera that I bought in 1984 or 5 while I was making Fright Night is now retail 40,000, wholesale 40,000, retail $50,000. I almost fell over. But I don't wear it. I don't care about cars. I don't care about clothes. For whatever's wrong, it all went over my head. You
Right.
know,
Right.
I the status symbols went over my head.
Right.
But I love people. I love people, and I love listening to people and talking to them and learning their stories. But I've
Right.
never. You have people a lot of people who know you now, right? Because
Mm.
of your work and your career.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, me too. And so I don't feel any need to try to impress people with worldly goods.
No.
I
No.
mean, I wish that I had the money to buy fine art, but I can't. I Time has become the most valuable thing I have,
Sure.
Nicholas.
Sure.
Time.
Sure.
I don't know how
Okay.
you feel about it, but yes.
Yeah. Yes. No, I think on that note, I really should let you go because I'm sorry, we've gone on way too long.
I'm
Um,
so sorry.
no,
I hope
no,
I haven't been
please don't
boring.
apologize. I was just absolutely enthralled listening to you, Tom. Thank you so much for being so
Well,
generous with your
I
time.
thank you for the excellent questions, and I hope I haven't pontificated too much.
Not
And
at all.
I hope that I've been encouraging to all the younger people out there who are looking for, if you look, we're blessed,
Yeah.
Nicholas.
Yeah.
I mean, and if you want, Clive is Clive. Clive with all of his health problems is blessed too.
Yeah.
I mean, with what he's done.
Yes.
The
No,
yeah,
I'm 100% behind you on that one. I think just being grateful also, I think, is one of the secrets to having that
I'm
happy
looking,
life.
and what I wrote the Notch about. The Notch is about redemption.
Right.
It's about making moral choices. I think that we're very, very lucky,
Yeah.
both of us and people like us, that we've had lives that have been as satisfying and gratifying as they have, even though they've been very, very up and down.
Yeah.
But I mean,
Yeah.
I personally have a great deal to be thankful for, and I'm thrilled that you're talking to me, and I'm even more thrilled that people are going to be listening to this. Can you imagine that? It's wonderful.
It's brilliant. It's brilliant. Tom, listen, you need to go back to writing.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank you.
so much. Take
God
care and
bless
hopefully see
everybody
you.
out there.
Yeah.
And you too, Nicholas.
Take
God
care.
bless. Thank you very much. I'm going
Bye.
to
Bye.
leave now.
You
Bye
too.
bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye. Bye bye.
Thank you again to Tom Holland. I'm really looking forward to receive. Thank you again to Tom Holland. I'm really looking forward to reading that sequel to Fright Night. Join me next time on the Chattering Hour as I talk with Darren Lynn Bousman, known for directing Saw 2, 3 and 4, St. Agatha, Repo the Genetic Opera, and the latest incarnation of the Saw franchise, Spiral. Join me then, and in the meantime, stay safe and well.